podcast and it airs nationally at Classical Minnesota Public Radio. First of all, a couple of items of business. You all had a couple of cards on your chairs when you came in. One is my card. You are to take that home and make a shrine to me and covet it, hold it closely, sleep with it, take it with you to the bathroom. Maybe not that. Also, Something Else Music Works gave you a card, and on that card is an access code to download 20 tracks of music from their catalog. Highly recommend you visit something.com when you're done here and get your free music. Something is spelled S-U-M-T-H-I-N-G, something. So, did everybody get those things? Excellent. Also, one more thing, don't forget there is an autograph signing session right after this, so if we run out of time for audience Q&A, you are more than welcome, in fact encouraged to join us downstairs in the Q room for the signing session, and then you can ask questions there as well. So if you don't get a chance to ask a question here, don't feel discouraged, come to the signing session and talk to us there. Now to the business at hand. I'm sitting next to, or in between I suppose, some of the most talented composers in the industry right now. They have all scored magnificent, memorable moments in our gaming lives. So please welcome Billy Martin. Most recently, he has scored Rayman Legends, also Rayman Origins. He has, yes, very, very good stuff. And dozens of other games, including several titles for Disney Interactive. Billy Martin. Peter McConnell. Most recently of Broken Age by Double Fine, also the Sly Cooper series, Grim Fandango, Psychonauts, Brutal Legend, etc. Mark Morgan. His newest title comes out later this year, God willing. It's Wasteland 2. Fallout fans could never forget the music he wrote for the first two Fallout games. And so a couple of the Zork games, and Prey 2, Planescape Torment, all of that belongs to Mark Morgan. Tom Salta. Project was for Halo Spartan Assault. Past scores include Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon, also Hawks, Red Steel, Prince of Persia, The Forgotten Sands. Garry Schyman. The little-known BioShock series. And most recently, BioShock Infinite, of course. Past soundtracks like Destroy All Humans, Dante's Inferno, and Cris Velasco. He's the baby. Cris just most recently wrote for Company of Heroes 2 last year, and you also probably know Chris's music from God of War. Mass Effect 2 and 3 came in on the DLC. Borderlands 2. So, that's our panel. Another round of applause. So, let's get started, because we want to hear these fellas talk, of course, enough of me. Garry, what's it like being awesome? Just kidding. You used, for the first two BioShock scores, you used large orchestras, and then for Infinite, you dialed things back significantly. Can you talk about why?
Well, really, BioShock Infinite shares some with the world of BioShock, but it really was a unique and different game. The setting was different. You're in the sky. You're not under the sea. And we really wanted, just basically we wanted to do something very different. We really wanted a different approach to the score, and as did I. So we wanted to reset it, and it's set in sort of this 1912 Americana, crazy, insane world. And so solo strings or small string ensembles seem to be the way to go. I discovered I'd never scored a game in this manner, but the way it unfolded worked out really well, because I really felt, because everything had to be approved by Ken Levine, who's this genius, but he, if he didn't like something, he'd let you know. So I decided, okay, the best way to communicate my intentions was to work with small string ensembles, and I had multiple sessions, so literally everything was mocked up using live players. So usually you don't do that because that's fairly expensive, but with small string ensembles it wasn't expensive, and so we'd bring 2 or 3 or 4 players in, and we'd spend 3 or 4 hours, and that's the way he really felt the approach, and so it just really worked. It just felt right for the game. And it was really interesting scoring it with small string ensembles, because even the, in the studio, the combat stuff, you don't think of, a string quartet doing combat music, but it was very effective. And then we tried doubling them, but it was actually less intense than, 4 or 5 or 6, as many as 10 players. Just really screeching on their instruments and getting this very visceral, close mic'd sound. So it worked out. It was very effective, and it created a unique sound and approach to the game. So.
And you've all written for various types of media, not just games. So let's talk for a minute, if we can, about what your favorite thing is about writing for games. Mark, you want to start?
Games are different in the sense that you obviously, most of the time, not playing a picture. So it opens you up to just write music as opposed to being just locked to seeing picture. So I don't know, man, it's just kind of more, it's sometimes more daunting because you have to find the story inside the game, for me.
Yeah, I think it's harder writing for games than when you're scoring to picture, but it frees you up. It's more creative, which can also be a bit of a stumbling block too, because the picture's not telling you what to do. You're sort of finding the voice of the game.
Sure. When you're scoring games, part of it is like scoring for the picture, because you have cutscenes, you have parts of the game that aren't interactive. And so you're scoring what's happening. You're writing music that is describing something or enhancing something that's happening in the moment. When you're scoring interactive parts of the game, you're scoring what might happen. And that is, I think that's pretty much what you were saying earlier. It's just that you have to kind of imagine what's going to happen in the action of a particular part of the game, and also how does that relate to all the other parts of the game, which may or may not happen in a predictable order. So I think it's very exciting to do that.
Oftentimes, you all might be given parameters or instructions by an audio director or someone who might not know quite as much as you do about music. Do you find it frustrating or helpful to get parameters? Billy?
Oh, it's very helpful to get as much information as you possibly can, even if it seems a little vague at first. Usually your producer or director will have some specific ideas about the feeling of the music they want to hear, and so they may have some kind of vague, unusual way of communicating what that feeling should be, and your job really is to translate that into musical terms so that you can create a very specific, identifiable sound for the game. Almost always, any project that you do has to have a very specific, identifiable voice, so that when you hear a piece of music from that, you immediately know, oh, that came from this X game. And if you've created that little audio world, then you've done your job.
Whether I've scored films, I've scored television shows, and of course games, and you are always writing for somebody. You're always working for them, and it is actually it's part of the process is to work with someone and find out it's their game. You have to write music that works for their project. It's not about you just being creative. we all write music and sometimes just for fun or for the orchestra or whatever. But when you're working on a game or a television or film, whatever it is, you're writing to make their project better. So yeah, you need their input and you have to be collaborative or you won't get hired. So you want that. You want that. And interesting things come out of it. I've had like I remember in the original BioShock, there's a scene where you're going down in the bathysphere, and originally they said, okay, we want that to be this. You're going to the scariest place on Earth. Okay, whatever. So I wrote a very scary piece of music, and then Ken said, no, it's too scary. We don't want to tell people what to feel. So we want something more mysterious. And then I wrote what became a really nice cue that was much more not as obvious as sort of the mysterioso kind of vibe, and I'm really happy. But that came out of collaboration, and so it can sometimes generate creative opportunities.
Some of you have taken over in the middle of a franchise, like, for instance, Cris coming into Mass Effect for the DLC for the second one and then continuing to work on the third. This is a similar situation with many of you. Tom, you had, I think, one of the most difficult jobs. Are there any Halo fans? Halo music fans? Yeah, well, if you have not heard Tom Salta's Halo Spartan Assault score, I highly recommend it. You were asked to write Halo music, but make it your own. Can you talk about that kind of responsibility?
Yes. Yeah, so Halo in 2001 is what inspired me to get into this crazy business as far as switching from making records to making video game music. And so I've been in love with it. In fact, a little known fact is that, and I finally admitted it now, is that I wrote Marty O'Donnell an email. Yes, email existed back then. And about, hey, I love what you do. If I could ever help you, I'm a big fan. Hey, blah, 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 whatever. And and then a decade later, working on the anniversary edition of Halo was an incredibly rewarding, almost surreal experience. I dropped the phone practically. It's like, what? It's like recreating every scene to Star Wars. Being like a director. But that taught me a lot. It really allowed me to get into the DNA of what makes Halo music sound like Halo music. All right, so that was really incredible. But then, a couple of years after that, now it's like, okay, now the stage is yours, go ahead, now make a Halo score. I'm like, I thought it would be, I'm like, oh my, it was incredibly daunting, but exciting at the same time and scary. And I think I beat myself up for a month before I would let anyone hear anything, because I was doing things, like, no, this doesn't sound Halo enough. I don't picture the grunts. No, it's not this. And so it was, but finally I kind of dialed into it and threw away a lot of stuff. But I finally found, I think it was that essence of it. And I'm a huge Halo fan. So I know what sounds Halo and I know what doesn't sound Halo. And it's interesting, you can write this perfect battle cue or this perfect dream sequence or atmospheric adventure thing, but there's something about it. It's either it's Halo or it's not, and my goal was, within, like, Billy said, within those first few seconds to hear it, it's like, that's from Halo, the whole franchise. So, I had the highest respect for what the original composers did on that, and I'm just thrilled to finally be part of that world and hopefully continue it.
Yeah, a couple of others. And this has been the case, like, you took over Sly Cooper, and, again, Mass Effect, and Fallout was kind of like taking over from Wasteland, right? In a little way, because the first Wasteland was the precursor to Fallout. Does everybody know that? Wasteland was the precursor to Fallout. So now we've gone through all these Fallout iterations, and now we're coming back to Wasteland 2.
They weren't able to make the game. They didn't own it, so
Oh.
took it away.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about working with live musicians, because this is something that, as you kind of hinted at earlier, Garry, can be largely dictated by budget. So as a result, many of you play a lot of your own instruments on your own soundtracks, right? Like Billy, you play just about every kind of saxophone or wind instrument that you can find. Saxophone, yeah. So let's hear a little bit about that, adding your own personal music to it, or this, in essence, your own performance to it.
Okay, well, I'll jump in first. Peter, you're next. Yeah, I mean, I started doing that just kind of out of necessity. I started doing lots of children's titles for Disney Interactive. The budgets weren't very big, and the easiest way to get a better sound on the things was for me to play as many things as possible and add them in. And also, even just when I'm writing and playing things for the producers, it's far easier for me to pick up a wind instrument and play the part rather than to try and make some computer sample sound like what it's supposed to sound like. It's just, I have a microphone set up in the room with me all the time. Even if it's not going to be a final track, I'll play stuff in to get the right sound. And that's what's worked for me.
Yeah, I think I started out similarly back in the old days of LucasArts. We would do anything possible on a very limited budget to make a track sound live. And I play a lot of things with strings on them, so if there was a guitar, or a banjo, or a violin, or something like that, I would put it in there. But it wasn't until Grim Fandango that I got a chance to work with some really great wind players, sax players, and that just opened up a whole new world for me. And ever since then, I've been lucky to work with a lot of live musicians and finding a place where I still do my own stuff on the tracks a lot. In Broken Age, there's a lot of guitar work and violin work that I did, electric violin work. And it's kind of nice to be able to just find that spot where you can do your own personal little, I'm popping my peas, sorry. Your own personal little form of expression. Whether it's a particular sound I get on an electric violin or something like that. It's just nice to be able to blend that in with people who really do this for a living and are just magnificent world-class players, like say the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra or some of the jazz players in San Francisco.
Well, I can't tell you how many times I wish I played guitar and things like that. I don't, I think the only live instrument that I ever played was ripping up pieces of paper on this little kid's score, and I would make instruments out of like whoosh, whoosh, and crunching things. But I love, just to sort of answer your question, I love working with live soloists that have a unique sound that are really different. And probably one of the coolest stories out of that was another dream of mine was always to work on the Prince of Persia franchise. That was like, I've been very fortunate. I have like dreamed of working on Halo, and that happened, and then Prince of Persia, and that happened, and Tom Clancy stuff, and that happened. And but years before I got a chance to work on Prince of Persia, I was walking in the streets of San Francisco, and I heard this weird sound echoing through the buildings, and it was like, almost like this singing metal weird bowed thing. And I saw this guy with his beard, and he was playing. He had like feathered metal things on his hands, and this big instrument. What is that? And I just stood like awestruck. Like, what is this dude doing? And it was a symbol. He called it a symbolon. It was not a symbol. It was like it's the own thing. It was this Persian instrument. I talked. I bought CDs, and I said, you know what? There's this game. If I ever get a chance to score this game, I didn't tell him what it was because he wouldn't even know what I was talking about. But I was thinking Prince of Persia. I said, I'm going to call you. And it was 4 years later. 4 years later, it finally happened. And I swear, I dug through the CDs. I'm like, okay, website here, and I found him. And his name was Michael Maisley. And I called him up. I'm like, dude, you're probably not going to remember me. But 4 years ago, I came up to you in the street. And I said, if I ever get this video game, I'm going to call you. But anyway, it was the coolest instrumental thing, and there was no one in the world that does what he does. It sounds like, and it was incredible. So it just added so much color and uniqueness to the score just without trying. You know? So I always do that.
Along those lines, oh, I'm sorry, Chris, did you have something to add?
Oh, I was just going to say, I think every composer at a game developers concert wanted to use that instrument. At some point, we all heard it, and I didn't realize that you already used it. So.
But sorry.
Just saving it up for something special.
So along those lines, what is the weirdest, strangest thing you've ever sampled to put in a score?
There's this percussionist, he'd been passing up dairy, and there was a big plastic cow, full size, and he hit beside it and made an incredible sound sample. Plastic cow being slammed. It's actually amazing. It's been in a few games. Whenever I need a big, giant boom, it's there. It's the cow.
I think the weirdest instrument I ever sampled was my face. It's for a little game called Calling All Cars, and the entire rhythm track. I could afford a trumpet, and I could afford my acoustic guitar and my violin and my face. So the bass was.
Was that a union gig?
Yeah. It was dark. It was done dark.
Besides the paper score for this Paper Kids game, I think on Red Steel there was a scene in the game where we had to create this really warped, disturbing circus meets 60s sci-fi meets, what's that movie? The Most Dangerous Game, when you're being hunted down. Anyway, so I wanted to make this really old, scary circus merry-go-round kind of thing, and I just went through our garage and just, oh, here's some rusty training wheels, and I'm like, like part into the music, so, and just like this old metal turning thing going through the music. It's not that original, but I think that was strange at the time.
It is interesting because we're always asked to, and we always want to come up with unique sounds, and because of sampling, which is, digitally recording almost anything to become a musical instrument. So if any of you out there want to be composers or are composers, the world is your oyster with sound. Anything can be a musical sound when organized and sampled properly and put in context of music.
What's it like when you have to score the apocalypse? Or after
the darker the better. As long as I keep saying, can you make it darker, I'm a happy boy.
Have you ever scared yourself?
Yeah, actually I did. On Wasteland, there's a couple of cues that I had to think about it because it's definitely scared me. But it's good, the darker the better in that particular stuff. Because it's not even about melody or anything. In fact, I don't even want it. Mainly you just have to do it with texture. So it's daunting, but it's cool.
I remember on the original BioShock, I was incorporating real-world sounds, and I found a website that seemed like an abandoned website. Some doctor who dealt with people with lung diseases had recorded the sounds of all these different very ill breathing, and some of them were very frightening, including the death rattle, if you know what that is. And I incorporated that into some of my cues, and it was very scary. When I told my wife what the sound was, she just like, oh, I've got to leave the room. The person dying in your music. So that was, and then, but also Dante's Inferno was full of like the darkest of dark. I got to score hell, which was really.
For Clive Barker's Jericho, I used a lot of, I found recordings of babies crying and processed that and incorporated it into the orchestra. And for me, the sound of crying babies is probably the most disturbing.
So along those lines, Peter and Billy, you have scored some of the most delightful comedic music, funny, light, and no less detailed or no less difficult or complex. So speak a little bit about writing funny stuff.
Well, first of all, I don't really think of it as funny. I take it very seriously. And so I take great issue. But, you know, I think it's just kind of an inclination because one, I've been told this by various folks I've worked with. Deb Madden, who was the artist on the Sly Cooper series, who I worked with a lot on the early Sly games, said, you know, it's really important not to try to be funny. Let the scene be funny. And so when you score it, do it in earnest. So I try to take that to heart, although I did grow up watching Carl Stahl, you know, Looney Tunes, and that's always an influence on someone who does this type of thing, I think. But I do actually try to play it straight, and then it will just be funny if you're really sort of feeling like you put yourself in the position of a ridiculous character doing a ridiculous thing, and really believe in that, and then write just the most sincere thing you can for that, and then stand back. Oh my God, that's hilarious.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head when you said the worst thing you can do is try to be funny. You have to let the music simply reflect the fun and lightness that's already on the screen. One thing that I sometimes do is I try to imagine the main character if it's a TV series or a game. Imagine the music that the main character would be hearing in his head as the scene is playing. What would he be listening to or thinking of as his soundtrack? And that, you know, he wouldn't think it was funny. It's all, you know, serious to him. So that's one thing that I do. And the other thing is to sometimes the orchestration of the music can give it a certain wink or smile. Sometimes I've written an entire piece of music and then at the end go, okay, and it's completely straightforward. Okay, now I'll take that flute melody out and replace it with a kazoo. Try that at home.
You've also, though, used your own voice. You sing a lot. Can you talk a little bit about singing in Rayman?
I have, yeah. And my cues, all the little munchkin voices are me singing. When I first came to Los Angeles and was trying to get into music, I mean, I was in a rock band and I was the primary songwriter and singer, so I was like I was a real singer. Now I'm a munchkin singer.
So as we were all filtering into the room here, we were hearing music from each of these gentlemen, and it occurred to me, you know, if I walked into a room and heard my voice just randomly, it would be a little awkward. So what is it like? I want each of you to answer this question. What's it like hearing your own music? Especially when you're in front of your peers.
Like hearing a recording of your own voice. I sound like that. No, I mean, it is a little odd. You know, sometimes when I finish writing score, almost every time, I don't want to hear that music for about 6 months. I just don't want to hear it. And then I go back to it and I start to appreciate what I had done. But for a good while, I don't want to hear it. I've been so into it, it's writing it, and it just, so, but now I hear it and it wasn't unpleasant.
I think if it weren't for deadlines, I would probably never finish a single queue. It's only through necessity of getting the game shipped that the music ever gets finished. I do the best job I can in the time I'm given. But going back, hearing something 6 months, a year later, yeah, it's a little nerve-wracking, and I think, God, I really want to change this.
To get a flashback effect to when it was made, like when we were listening to the stuff earlier, I was thinking, there's some music from Broken Age playing, and I was thinking, oh yeah, boy, there's that cue, and I remember, recording it, and I remember thinking, oh boy, they did such a great job on that one little spot, or I wish we'd gotten a chance to do, the whole sort of, it's so intense working on a project, especially when you're under deadline, that when you're actually hearing your music later, and I also agree with you, I have to take a break from it, like for a long time. But when you hear it later, it's sort of like reading your own diary. You instantly are experiencing this part of your life that all this blood and sweat and tears that went into making something, and then you hear other folks' music and think, wow, I must have gone through the same thing.
I just find it hard not to hear it in context with what I'm seeing. Sometimes it just works better when you see what's going on as opposed to just music. For me.
Which do you, I know I didn't let you all answer. Such a liar. You okay? All right. Which do you prefer? Do you prefer concept art, or do you prefer seeing gameplay, some kind of demo? What works best for each of you? In terms of course of inspiration and getting in the mindset of a game.
Well, I think for me, the particular games I sort of do, that real dark kind of stuff, the art just tells me what I need to know usually. For me, it just totally works.
It's really helpful for me to see gameplay captured if it's available, because especially if you're doing something faster paced or lighter, it's really helpful to see how things are moving, how fast they're moving. That can influence the tone of the music a lot.
Usually the first thing you get is concept art because the game isn't working and they've hired you. So that's all you have. I would rather see gameplay, although you'd be surprised at how primitive there'd be like no background, it'd be like grids and you're seeing characters sort of moving through it. But I find that is more interesting. It works better for me in terms of inspiring the music because I really get a sense of space. Maybe because I started out as a film television composer. And then, as you were saying, a lot of what I do, maybe a third to half, is I'm scoring picture. So I do actually write a lot of the BioShock Infinite was scenes that where I was really locked to the images. So I had to have that. It had to be finished to a certain extent for me to write to it, because otherwise it wouldn't work.
I feel that in hindsight, I'm thinking that definitely the concept art and the glorified idea of the game is way more inspiring when creating those initial ideas. Prince of Persia, the best cues that I wrote in that game were before I actually saw anything. But I feel much more comfortable seeing the footage just to make sure it sits right, or make sure it has enough rhythm in it. But as far as those raw concepts, which is kind of like what the art is, it's like, okay, don't worry about how many polygons we can do, just draw whatever. That open cloud, that open sky, and so I feel that's best for getting those initial ideas. But because when you get into the game itself, and when I was doing Hawks, I got an Excel sheet, and I'm looking at the back of a little low-res jet with an engine noise going, and that was like, write the score. I mean, literally. So that did not inspire me at all. Before I actually saw that, I felt better about it. I'm like, this is gonna suck.
I like getting the concept art more than seeing a half-finished, broken game. Especially the cinematics too, once you get to that, which is usually the end of the cycle. They don't look good until the very, very end. And unfortunately, you have to see it to score it because that's the picture. But you know, I've done numerous games where, you know, a big explosion, it's a gray ball that gets bigger, and, or a giant spaceship, and they're telling you, oh, it's this huge space battle, it's epic, you've got to write the best thing you've ever written in your life, and it's just gray boxes. Hanging out in a gray background, expanding balls.
It's like a 2 or 3 stage process, and the first stage of the concept art is, for me, a really big one because that's where the themes happen. And I remember in Broken Age, I was doing a sketch for the opening of the game, and it wasn't quite right somehow, and I knew it wasn't. I can't remember whether they told me or whether I just knew. And I ran into Tim Schafer in the airport, and he said, hey, have you seen the new concept art for Bella, who's the main character, one of the main characters? I said, no, he shows me and pulls up his iPhone, and there she is. Zaps it over to my iPhone. It's like a commercial for iPhones. Oh, wow, oh yeah, she really is different. I took that home, and it just changed the sketch altogether just from that one little, you know, still picture.
Sure. What is the fastest you've ever had to write a score? Whether it be for, I know for television, which you've done quite a bit of, you have way less time, right?
Usually 3 days. It's getting, you know, it started out about 5 days, and now it's, and then they're changing the picture most of the time too. So it gets done about 3 days for about, you know, anywhere from 20 to 35 minutes.
20 to 35 minutes of music or picture?
Music.
Wow, yeah. How about games? What's the fastest you've ever been required to write a score for a game?
From my experience with games is the opposite of television. So you have almost too much time. Sometimes you're working on a game for well over a year, and I actually prefer it to be a little more limited than that. 3 or 4 months would be maybe ideal. I Destroy Humans, I had 2 months, which to me was luxury because I was coming from the TV world. I once scored 68 minutes of music in 8 days, and for a TV movie, and it was like I wanted to give up the business at that point. I didn't sleep for 8 days. It's not fun. You're under so much pressure and expected to deliver, or else you feel like your life's going to end. So I do like the leisurely pace of scoring a game, but sometimes it's too leisurely.
Yeah, it's kind of all over the map. I'm still working on a game called Kingdom Under Fire 2, and I've been working on and off on that for like 3 years. But then for Zombie U, we had 10 days to do the score, including the live session. And the worst was Clive Barker's Jericho, and that was 2 hours of music in about 2 weeks, including the live session. That was
If you have too long of a schedule, don't forget the power of procrastination. I find it really. It's nothing like self-imposed pressure.
I had, for Disney's Chicken Little video game, I had 3 weeks to do the score. It was a last minute, they decided the music they had wasn't working, so they got someone else, which turned out to be me. I think it was about 20 minutes. It wasn't a ton.
Yeah. So what are some of the projects, like you've dreamed of working on Prince of Persia and Halo? Are there any pinnacle projects for any of you that you wish you could do? Whether it's been something like, I wish I could score Star Wars, even if it's already been done.
well, that.
You're all satisfied.
No, actually, I would love to work on Star Wars. That's really my dream, would be to work on Star Wars. But
I just got hired to work on stuff.
There's the table for that. But my one dream job was to work with Clive Barker, and I have a long history of just being a fan, going to book signings before I even got into writing music. And people joke that I I stalked him for years, but that's kind of true. But I went from getting the courage one day to bring a demo CD to him. I can't even imagine what was on that, but it was horrible. But Clive was he was just so nice and genuine and encouraging, and just made me really feel like, hey, we might work together someday. And I told him this is number one on my bucket list right now, is to work with you. So it's gonna happen. And then I would continue going to book signings every year or whatever, and give him an updated CD, like, oh, here's what I've been up to. They got increasingly less horrible. And then one day I'm sitting in my apartment in LA and I get a phone call and it says blocked number. At the time, the only person I knew that was blocked the number was my parents, because they were weird. Like, oh, you got to block your number. They're gonna get you. But it said blocked, and I thought, I don't know if I want to talk to them right now, but I'll answer it anyways. And Clive has a very distinctive gravelly voice, and it was him, and my knees literally buckled. And he called and he said, hey, I've got the project. I think after all these years, it's time. So I got to hang out with my hero.
One of my favorite games is Portal. So I'm Portal. But I probably won't happen because Valve has all their stuff in-house, but it'd be fun.
I would like to do something that's not funny. I would love to do a really serious fantasy type Lord of the Rings kind of thing. I did one about 10 years ago based on the King Arthur legends, and it was just a blast for me. And unfortunately, the game sold about 8 copies. It's called The Apprentice Knight. Greg remembers it.
That's actually a good question. I'm sorry, did you
Well, I
want
was just going to say, I'd like to do more of what I'm doing, and I think we all would, and are all pretty happy with the projects we're working on. One thing I've always wanted to do is live musical theater that was in some way like a game that had some kind of interactive component to it. And I think that'd be really interesting. I don't know that I haven't seen anything like that in a theater that quite fits the bill yet. I think that'd be cool.
some of you have collaborated with other composers on scores. Like Cris, you've done that. You've worked with Sasha Dikitzian for Mass Effect. You worked with Christoph Erol for Rayman Legends. What's it like working with, kind of like-minded people, but you're trying to create something synthetic that works together? So can you speak a little bit about that?
It's in our case, it was. It can be very odd because you're communicating. Christoph's. I'm in California, and Christoph's in France, and most of our communication was really just through email, and we even talked on the phone. He's embarrassed about his English, as you know, which has really actually gotten a lot better. But we ended up. Rather than working on the same cues together, we had separate areas of the game that we were each responsible for, and then our interaction was often in sharing themes. I would have a section of the game, but the producer, Michelle Ansel, would want a theme that Christoph had written in another part of the game to reappear. So I would use his theme, or he used some of my themes in areas he was working on. So that's how that material got traded back and forth between us on that.
Sure. Yeah, so I've had projects where, like God of War or Mass Effect, where there's multiple composers, and that's sort of like what Billy was doing, and that's definitely different than collaborating with somebody, which is what Sasha and I did on Mass Effect. It can work out really, really well because you're each bringing your strengths to the table and then combining them and doing something that maybe you could have done on your own.
Yeah, was going to say a long time ago in the early LucasArts days, there were 3 of us composers, and we kind of worked it out like sort of co-songwriters in a band, so that we had sort of spheres of influence in the game, so that we were working on our own stuff, but we would trade tunes back and forth, and sometimes there are tunes now where I'm not sure which part of it I wrote and which part Michael Land wrote, because we had a nice, working relationship that way. And that's a fun thing to do, to really have to toss things back and forth. And it's kind of rare in instrumental music, I think.
I know that, Tom, you have a lot of extra musical activities with Atlas Plug and things like that. So how many of you have a chance to create music just for the sake of creating music? Do you do that? Do you write music just for the hell of it? Or are you pretty much locked into writing it for a project?
Yeah, well, I gotta say, writing your own music is a completely different thing altogether. When I did Atlas Plug, that was really my doorway into the video game industry. I didn't know where to start. I came from records, and then I'm walking around E3 with a suitcase of CDs, thinking that I'm going to get hired because I have game-ish music that I just whipped up in 2 weeks. And I'm like, hey, I worked on the Cher record, and they just blank stares, just like yours right now. And that didn't work. So, then I had said, well, Atlas Plug, that's gonna. If I said, I got the sense that composers were really not considered cool, but artists like Crystal Method were cool. So I'm like, okay, so no one knows me anyway. I'll just become an artist. So I put my last name backwards. I got Atlas, and then Unplugged was like acoustics, and Plugged is like electronic. I don't know. Atlas Plugged. It sounds good. And then did this whole album, and but the process of doing your own music is different, because now it's like I don't have any third party telling me what to do or influencing my creative. It's just like, whatever. What do you have to say? Who are you musically? What do I resonate with? So that was really scary. It was kind of like staring in a mirror all day at your image. It's like, okay, what do you got? What are you gonna do? And that was what that was. So it's a whole different thing altogether. I'm glad I did it. So it told me a lot about what my strengths are, and a lot about what my many weaknesses are. But it's revealing.
Yeah, I feel for you. I had a band for a bunch of years, different bands, and there's nothing worse than being your own artistic boss. People who do that, my hat goes off to them. Self-expression, whatever you say. But it's great to have done it, isn't it?
I was just wondering if you feel like you don't get to express what you want musically through games now.
No, I feel pretty lucky, actually. I mean, I could see that being the case, but I've been lucky with variety, I think.
I feel the same way, because I get asked all the time, oh, don't you want to write a symphony or whatever, something for yourself? And I feel very lucky that I get to write what I would probably write anyways.
Yeah, I imagine doing that at some like at retirement or something like that. Some great thing, opus work, way up in the future or something like that. But I don't really feel like, oh, they're not letting me do my novel now. Damn it.
What's really cool about it, a nice unexpected side effect, is when you create your own music and it's you, and if people actually like it, then you're getting asked to borrow influences from yourself, which is much more comfortable than trying to force sounding like someone who you're not. So that happened immediately after some licenses, like early and Rally Sport Challenge, and then I got a call from EA to do Need for Speed Underground 2. And he's like, well, we want it to kind of sound like Atlas Plug. I'm like, oh, wow, sure. And that was kind of cool. And even to this day, I'm starting to work on a new thing, and they're like, you want to go back to some of the Atlas Plus. It's been over a decade since that record. I'm trying to get another record out, but I've been kept too busy. But it's kind of cool that it's still a color, it's still an influence in things that I'm doing now, and clients are actually referring to it. So that was kind of nice. It gives them another chance to force me to borrow from someone, you know, like, sound like Hans Zimmer, really? And others. You know, but so it's good. It's cool.
I wrote a bill being shared up, and it's going to be performed soon. And I just realized my artist name would be Yamish Yarek. Not help my career, so I thought I will not use the backwards version of my name. But I like to write just music that pleases me, you know, and it's not, I mean, if you write like a concert piece, they're very hard to get performed because you have an orchestra, you have to get an orchestra, it's not like you have one or two musicians that can do it. And I also I've written a lot of songs for Matt Harding. I don't know if you know who Matt Harding is, they have the dances all over the world. So I get to write goofy songs for Matt, so that's also not video game music and fun to do. I just wrote a song for a Chinese movie. They wanted, I was in China last year, just speaking about my work, and someone came up to me and said, "We have a movie, and we want you to write a song for it." And I kind of thought, here's my agent. And they did. They contacted my agent, and I wrote a song for a Chinese movie. Cool.
I think we have a few minutes here for audience questions. We'll have you queue up maybe in the correct, maybe. Yeah.
We can just do a line.
Just do a line right here. And don't forget, we can talk after in the signing session too. So we've got about 8 minutes.
All right, so I have a problem. Whenever the official soundtrack gets released, it's usually not a complete score. Do you have, like, Cris, between you, Jesper, and Sasha, you probably have 60, 70 tracks in Borderlands 2. The official soundtrack has 23. Do you have any influence
Something
on that?
else just released Volume 2, which has a lot more of the score. And you can actually pre-order it right now. But yeah, it depends on the publisher and developer. Like for Company of Heroes, they let me do whatever I want, and I sort of polled my Twitter feed and said, "Do you guys want me to arrange an album that I like, or do you want everything?" And you can arrange your own. The consensus was everything, so in the future I'll probably just maybe do everything.
If you're exiting, could you maybe be a little more silent so that the rest of the audience can hear the questions? Thank you very much. Go ahead.
Hi, what's your advice for someone that wants to get into the game music industry?
There are things that you need to go to and organizations you need to join. You need to go to the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco, and you need to join organizations like GANG, the Game Audio Network Guild, and the Society of Composers and Lyricists. That will enable you to meet other people that are doing what you want to do and that are also trying to get into the business, so that you can make connections with those people and figure out what it is you need to be doing.
Right. I'm assuming you're a trained musician. Yeah. So I mean, if you're not, you then want to get some education. You want to write a lot of music, constantly writing music that sounds, like something you've heard or that is original, whatever. Become a really good composer.
And I think you have to also love games if you want to work in games. And then just be tenacious, because it took some people, we all have different paths. We got in. It took me, after music school, about 8 years to land my first game.
Thanks very much.
Well, try working for another composer that does it too. I mean, that's one of the best ways. Yeah, that's a good way.
Hi, a few years back, I went to a workshop, I believe it was Berkeley, for game composition, and there were some panelists there, and they kind of discouraged melody, distinctive melody, kind of make it blend into the background, kind of like what Mark was alluding to, some of the notes he got from some of his. But Billy, I love the Rayman scores so much. They kind of hark back to the distinctive melodies from like games like Sonic series, Mario series, just very personable, and that's kind of like the opposite ends of the spectrum. Some are just convinced that they're gonna bore into the heads of the gamers if they spend 45 minutes on a tricky puzzle or something. Was that ever anything that the tightrope they asked you to walk?
Can I brag about Billy for a second? I'm going to interrupt him. Okay, Billy is an anomaly because Billy can write amazingly memorable melodies that you can listen to over and over and don't get sick of. And that's really hard to do. And that's why I hire Billy every chance I get. No, it's true, but go ahead, Billy. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Tom. I love writing melodies, but of course it depends on the project. That's not right for every project, and it has to be for a project where that's what they want, and where it fits into that. And there are situations where that would get in the way, so you have to be sensitive to that.
Thank you.
But they wanted it on Rayman.
Hi, I'm a huge fan of the Destroy All Humans games, and I kind of wanted to know, since usually in the alien invasion stories the humans are the heroes, how did you approach writing music for a game where the alien invaders were the protagonists, for lack of a better term?
So are you talking about the original game, the one set in the 50s, right?
Yeah.
Well, okay, so the music direction for that was pretty straightforward. They wanted the score to sound like something from the 50s. And Bernard Herrmann wrote a very famous score for The Day the Earth Stood Still. So that was their direction. So it really didn't matter that the aliens were invading or you were playing an alien. It was really about creating that vibe, that 1950s vibe, because it ultimately was sort of tongue-in-cheek comedy game in essence. But again, I'm talking about taking it seriously. The music could not be funny. It had to make, but it was funny in the sense that it was the style, this sort of old-fashioned Hollywood style of scoring, a la Bernard Herrmann. So that was really the approach. And then you just get, okay, here's what we need. I think each level there were like three different types of cues based upon whether you're just sort of kind of looking around, or if you're actively involved in combat, and the music would cross-fade between those, so you just had a real-world assignment. You're creating mood and vibe for this level, and et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you.
This will be the last question. If you don't mind, you can come down to the signing session and you can speak to us. So, last question. Thank you.
Geared more towards Tom. I come from a background of making records myself. I would consider myself a mixing engineer and not so much a composer, but I'm very interested in putting music into games. So, like Need for Speed 2, definitely felt like I was in a souped-up car with a banging sound system, driving around in a personal rave for a sound system. I feel like nowadays there really isn't opportunities to put personal, like dance-oriented music in games. Do you feel that's true, or?
Actually, I do see opportunities for that, and in the full range of games too. Not just AAA games like Need for Speeds and driving games and sports games, but I mean, there's a game that my 13-year-old son plays all the time, and it's all techno music, and it's on this iPhone, and it's this little bouncing cube. I'm sure one of you know what I'm talking about. I don't know the name of it, but I'm amazed, and it's all synchronized to the music, and it's like just total, full-out DJ music, techno, and that kind of stuff. The game world has expanded, so there's so many opportunities for different kinds of music, and I see more and more of electronic and, mixer-oriented and DJ-oriented stuff coming. Maybe it's not as, every game, obviously, but a lot.
Thank you all so much.